you so much for coming. It's a pleasure and so excited for you to be here. So this week we have the one and only Steve Grau. He is the CEO, founder of Royal Ambulance. Now, I'm going to let Steve do an intro on himself just because he's been in the scene of building his company for, I believe, the last 12 years. And, I mean, there's a lot of work doing that here in the Bay Area, and he's done an incredible job. And I can't make, the intro for him and really cover all the pieces, so I'll let him talk about, who he is and how he got here. So if you want to give a quick intro, that'd be awesome.
Sure. Well, again, thank you guys for coming. Josh is a mutual friend, knows my brother-in-law, who we just brought on to market and try to grow our business because we've been very geographically based. We're based here in the Bay Area, and we started out in San Leandro. For those who don't know, it's right across the bay next to Oakland, and we cover pretty much whole Bay Area, but the way that the medical transportation business works, especially the ambulance stuff, we're regulated by like 47 different agencies. One of them is emergency medical services agencies, and in order for you to grow, you got to apply and get a license. So like the growing thing is a very structured and limited thing. So, but all the principles of growth apply to marketing, and in order for us to scale beyond this immediate geography, we also need to figure out how to innovate and get a little bit, smarter with today's day and age and technology and growth marketing. And so I'm learning as a CEO alongside, I think, all of us on how to hack our growth, but also how to deliver better results quicker and faster. Because, when you think about like a 12-year-old startup, that doesn't make lots of sense from the technical digital world. But if you look at the business projections or how the businesses are structured, especially in such a heavy labor-involved business, such a regulated business, I think we're just kind of tapping into our potential and opportunity and dialing in what we're trying to do best, which is innovate in the healthcare space and adopt with a lot of elements that are constantly challenging our healthcare environment. For those of you who are following healthcare, there's a lot of changes, a lot of consolidation. We'll dive in and talk a little bit about that more. But I started, funny story, I actually started in the Bay Area when I was 12 years old. We moved here. I was born and raised in Odessa, Ukraine. And funny story about this building, my first job as I immigrated with my family was working for the San Francisco Chronicle and Examiner. And one of the first, outside of the paper routes, one of the first hustles I had was selling newspapers at Candlestick Park. So the way that it would work out is, you'd come here right into this building, in fact, into the little back alley over there, and you would meet with your crew. And your crew would basically load up Sunday papers. And for those of you who've seen the back in the day Sunday paper, this motherfucker was like 5 pounds. So you basically took your Sunday papers, you loaded up in this little metal cart, and you loaded the carts back on the truck, and then you drove to Candlestick Park right around 9 a.m. when people started tailgating. So as they're tailgating, you're running around the rows, and you're trying to sling them the newspaper, right? They're getting fucked up, and you're like, oh, here, grab the Sunday paper. So that was my kind of first hustle. But the real hustle was, because half of the people don't use all their tickets, and so they'll give you a ticket for a paper, like my friend didn't come, here's a ticket. And then you really make money on selling tickets. So after you're done with the newspapers, you stand in front next to the booth that tries to sell the tickets and out hustle the booth. So that was my kind of first hustle here with the Chronicle Examiner. So this really brings me like lots of memories. I grew up here. I'm not a biggest studious person. I didn't go to college. Just didn't agree with philosophy. Now I just have all kinds of learning disabilities. So I'm a much more hands-on person. I did tech for the next 10 years. I used to be in IT director, consultant, and I worked for all kinds of different companies from startups because it was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, so .com was booming. This is where you just register shit with .com and, sold it tomorrow for a ridiculous amount of money if you had an amazing domain name. I don't know, for those who remember, people used to be in the domain name game hustle. I mean, they didn't do shit else. They just bought domain names and then sold them later, which is crazy, right? But that's what I did for the next 10 years. And then after going through some personal reflections, and life's funny, I think sometimes in that way, it's like, right, your mind is like a big Google search engine. If you put down an interesting search string, it'll start returning results. For me, it was looking for new opportunities. And then what really led me to this is my grandfather had 2 strokes, which kind of left him paralyzed. And then I ended up being his care coordinator, and that's what got me into healthcare. Fast forward 12 years, I started this medical transportation business, and then we've been grinding ever since. So that's kind of the basic story. Over that course, we've been, fortunate to, I think, make a ton of mistakes. So I'm open to discussing some of those. We earned some accolades. We got on the Inc. 5,000 fastest growing companies a bunch of years in a row. And now we're trying to really focus on a couple of things. Geographic growth and scalability, as challenging as it is in a regulated environment. We're looking really all those elements of product market fit. How can we identify and currently structure our offering to better fit within the healthcare challenges? And then we're always trying to figure out how to keep our employment pipeline full, because this is everybody's challenge today in healthcare. People can't, because the market is so hot, people can't find entry-level positions and can't staff them. So if I can't staff ambulances, I can't run calls. So those are kind of just like the general elements which we're focusing on. So I'll pause at that.
Wow, I mean, it's definitely been an incredible journey for you. And, as you got into this industry, obviously I think one of the things that's funny is, I like to say a lot of people try to avoid emergencies with new businesses, and you sort of made emergencies your business, taking care of them, right?
Well said.
And now you're starting this company, and do you have anybody who was either like a mentor or you looked up to in the industry who could give you some direction at least, or were you just doing this entirely on your own?
In terms of mentors, I didn't have anybody in this industry. In general, this medical transportation space is super stale, and there's just not a lot of innovation that goes on around it. I mean, so really, when you're looking for opportunities to disrupt stuff, things like that are like prime for picking. In terms, back to mentors, I really didn't really have a lot of mentors growing up, period. As I mentioned, I was kind of doing stuff on my own. I think a lot of my inspiration came from reading like Fortune magazine, and you're like, read Fortune and stories about people that do shit, and again, kind of internet was just coming around, not to age myself, but you didn't have as much content as you have right now, right? Right now, content is coming out of everywhere. But before, like Fortune, you read the magazine, you read people's stories, and really the people's achievement, and you're like, they did this, I can do this. So I think it's just changing your mentality and your perspective. And another thing, I'll tell you another side story. What inspired me is actually meeting my wife's father's friends, and my wife's father, who was also an entrepreneur, and he started a company and grew it, and then you met his friends, and they're all like immigrants, right? And the immigrants barely speaking English, but they're hustling their own, they're doing their own shit, some in finance, some in translation, and then once you have that little circle of people that's been there and done that. And once you break through, not just like, magazine pages, that shit isn't, a little remote, but once you have that in the forefront, I think that was my real biggest, like, I'm not that much stupider than these people. And so, like, I think that element of creating a circle of reality around you and making that circle real is what really gave me inspiration. Not just, business related and healthcare. I think as you're progressing in different ways, you will find like, look at what they're doing, look at what they're doing. But bringing that into your sphere is what I think really pushes you into reality.
Yeah, I think, going off of that point, that many people the problem is they stay as spectators and they just never get into the sport.
Right.
And you were a spectator and then got into the sport, and that's really what made the difference. And, going off of that, one of the hardest things to do in founding any company is knowing who your co-founders are going to be. And your reason for starting this company was probably very different than theirs. You had, a personal, I would say, if tragedy is the right word, that really motivated you forward. How do you get your co-founders on board and get them to be just inspired as you are to go and push the company forward, especially in the early days?
Super good question, right? Because we all need support. I think co-founders, it's a stretchy kind of a sense. So when I started the company, the first two dudes that I got to help me out were my childhood best friends. And it's about finding and understanding what you're missing from, understanding the big picture. To me, was finance, which made me make so many mistakes around that particular field. So, the first person I got, like, can you help me, was my best friend from childhood, because he had an MBA from in finance. And he was helping me part-time. He had a full-time job actually at Ring Central that went public a little recently, and he cashed out nicely. But it was a part-time job for him, and that this is one advice I'm gonna be very I think specific about. You really gotta consistently benchmark the people that work with you, and just because they helped you start something doesn't mean that they need to continue with you. I literally bought him out this year, which was probably 5 years too late, right? Legitimately, because as your organization grows, your needs change. And my second partner was also my childhood, my high school best friend. And this guy had a gift of gab, was a super good guy, and he could be like the face of the company, because part of our business development was all about hustle. Let us engage with customers and make sure we're on top of the mind, and because it's such a analog business in a way. So he was excellent at that. But I think as you grow, your needs consistently change, and you got to be constantly real about what that change requires. Because if you're stuck with the same people, your growth is going to be greatly impacted. And I think we could have been way further ahead if I was real about those challenges, but you just don't know how to confront that. So figuring out at which point you need to disconnect, and at which point you need to learn how to recruit, how to hire, how to manage, how to lead. All of those elements become, but again, I don't think finding your close friends and bringing them on early on if they have applicable skills is a bad idea. You might fuck up your friendship later on. That's totally true. I did with that's just how it goes. But because that's also things you learn. I had a really nice separation this time around. The first time around, it was not so nice. And but again, I think when you're starting out, you gotta have people that have your back, because you can't really worry about relational coordination. I just met you, I don't know what you're about, right? We're just learning how to speak our language. When it's your boys, you already know what it's all about. You know they're gonna stay up, and they're gonna have your back, if that's the most important thing back then. So that's kind of my thing about founders.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. One of the things is like, how are you going to work 20-hour days and you just met somebody like 4 months ago and trust them to do that with you? It's very difficult to say the least. Now, you're entering into this space and you could have done, a number of things in the healthcare space, to say the least, but you chose transportation. Now, is it because there was a large demand, that there was, great, as you would say, maybe like product market fit or product service market fit around this, that you jumped in? And was that the reason for it?
It was a couple of reasons for it. So, in Silicon Valley, we talk a lot about prototyping, right? We talk a lot about build your MVP, right? We talk a lot about innovation from the technology perspective and from just the development of things. To me, it started out as prototyping a career because I looked at healthcare and I said, look, I can be passionate about it. There is like a tremendous amount of impact that you can make from a very interpersonal space, because if you're helping people and you're making the world a better place, whether it's one person at a time or you have a cascading impact, it has a different emotional, gratification. So I was like, okay, healthcare is awesome, but I am not the best or astute learner. I'm not going to medical school, that's for sure. So how else can I apply what I know how to do in IT, which is really solve problems, right? Like being IT and being in the EMT is really similar because you're approaching things from an algorithmic problem-solving level. What's the mechanism of injury? What hurts? What's broken? How can I fix it based on what I know how to fix? So the way that I looked at it is, what's the quickest way I can get into healthcare? And to become an EMT, it takes 160 hours of training. You can basically go to an accelerated school and do it in a 2-week, 14-day boot camp. After 14 days, you got to go and pass your national registry exam. Back, when Grandpa did it, there was no registry exam. So you just apply with a county and get your card, and boom, you can go and touch people. So it was the quickest way for me to say, yes, I like doing that. No, I should move on. So I think that element of prototyping was alive and well from that perspective. Maybe I didn't verbalize it that way, but it was also a great way for me, back to the ambulance space in particular. It was also, if you evaluated where you can start and what you need in order to get started, it was also a very low barrier to entry. It was somewhat loosely regulated just because I started in San Leandro. There wasn't a lot of licensure that I had to get back then. Today, everybody's smarted up and there's licensure galore. But I think those two elements, how quickly can I start? What's the lowest amount of money I can spend to figure out if I'm going to be success or failure, if I'm going to like it or hate it? All of that applied to my decision to do that, and I think it paid off fairly well.
That's great to hear, and obviously, you guys are growing, so definitely agree with you. You guys are on a great trajectory. Now, one of the things is, so you got started and you understand what field you want to be in, and now you're finally starting to deliver as customer service, right? You're working with customers, but also patients. And it's not just one side, there's two sides of this equation, and you're in this constant balance. And you have to define your service on the feedback they're giving you. So how has your service changed based on the patient feedback as well as the customer feedback that you're getting?
Oh wow, this is a really challenging subject matter for us. And I'll tell you why. Because when we originally started the company, and again, your thoughts are just not well formed, right? You think you're like, I've seen what kind of care my grandfather gets rendered, so I see opportunity. I see how patients react to amazing clinicians. I see how they weather with, when people don't treat them like people. When people get reminded that they're dependents, that is a big mindfuck, and people get really depressed. around that. Once you're depressed, really hard for you to react to clinical care. And that's just a physiological fact. So, when we're starting working on the patient scenario and how can we make the patient's journey better, it was really interesting and really awesome. But then as we were progressing, you realize that I'm not in a really, I want to say it nicely. Let me say the other statement, that I'm really a business to business. Patients are not my customers directly. It's not insurance companies, but they are one of those. Who hires us directly is healthcare institutions, number one. So we started out with skilled nursing facilities. So skilled nursing, you know what, let me rewind this for 1 second, just so, because you think ambulance service lights and sirens, right? And we're in ambulance service lights and sirens. So in order to be a 911 ambulance service with lights and sirens, you have to get a contract with a county, right? In order for you to get a contract with a county, you got to grow your way into it. Because no county wants to say, oh, hey, you just started a company? Cool, take care of my 700,000 people. Good luck, right? Nobody's going to do that. You got to come in and say, like, oh, I've done this, and this is my capability and the capacity. Plus, you need to know how to grease all the political wheels. Plus, you got to know how to show performance standards. On the 911 side, it gets crazy complicated. This is why there's like 3 companies in the United States that bid for contracts, like Alameda County, Santa Clara. San Francisco is a fucking disaster because there's like zones and fire department, and then it gets super political. It's crazy. The point of the story is who we serve hospital systems because what they worry about is population health. Because they got a ton of patients coming into their emergency departments, and they have to discharge a ton of patients to different other healthcare entities. Now, the other customer segment, and that's really where we started, is skilled nursing facilities, because they have thousands of really sick old people, and those really sick old people get really sick and old all the time. And they really need transport to help them either go to the hospital. Oh my God, it's not a life-threatening emergency, but it's an emergency. So we started building a system that was kind of replicated 911. So meaning that if a grandma in a skilled nursing facility gets really sick, they call us and we're there in 20 minutes. It's not 9 minutes and 59 seconds like 911, but for most emergencies, that does the job just fine. And so that, took us into like, wait, those are our customers. HBR has an amazing article. It's like, it really says, who's your primary customer? Because everybody can't be your primary customer. You want to know where to focus your resources, right? Like if you say, okay, the supply chain is my primary customer, or the patients are my primary customer, or employees are my primary customer, because all those 3 can be really true. It's kind of why we started focusing our mission and really looking at all 3 of those segments. Because if I don't keep the patients happy and deliver the highest level of patient experience, then nobody wants to hire me, because that's my differentiator, because I make them look good. I make my customers look good in front of their patients. But if I can't deliver on the quick response times, ease of use, and things like that, then I'm fucked. Nobody wants to hire me. But if I can't treat my employees in the best of possible manner, we establish this partnership, then nobody wants to come to work for me. So keeping your stakeholders balanced, but also differentiating who's your primary customer is very important exercise you play along somewhere. So hope I answered that.
It seems like you're obviously in a very difficult market to find that customer and obviously get that customer to come on board. Can you talk to us a little bit about what your sales cycle looks like in something like this, and maybe that's a barrier to entry alone of why most people don't start a business in this industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started, our original customer segment was skilled nursing facility. Again, because of the reason of low barrier to entry. Because the way that it works, in any skilled nursing facility, I have about 30 nurses who who can pick up the phone and call me directly. So those become my immediate customers. I'm not worried about contracts because my contract is my word that I'm going to be there consistently in 30 minutes or less, or your pizza is free. So I'm going to, really try to make sure that my KPIs, what I'm measuring in terms of performance, is consistent. And so that's was an easy way for us to build up customer base and to build up scale. And now if I'm in the territory and I got 7 ambulances constantly bringing patients to a hospital, now they're interested. Now, the biggest opportunity is obviously hospitals because they have such mass. If I close, for example, Sutter Health, who is a 30 hospital healthcare system, is probably $45 million in annual revenue for me. I don't have them. But because I don't have them, because I don't have scale geographically, right? But smaller healthcare systems, like one of my biggest customers is Alameda Health System. And they have like 3 hospitals, 3 skilled nursing facility, a psych. They really cater to the sickest of the sick and the neediest of the needy in Alameda County. And the sales cycles there can be crazy because part of it is establishing context. Part of it is making sure that they have a need. Part of it is making them fire their existing provider. So all of that takes a lot of time and energy. My sales cycle can be a year, or if I get an RFP, which is the worst fucking process ever, then it's going to be a lot shorter, like 6 to 7 months.
Wow. Yeah, definitely, I'd say a tough barrier to entry to get into and deal with those type of sales cycles, as well as, the number of variables. It's not just showing up to conferences and having a weekly, or bi-monthly meeting with somebody, or just follow-up emails. So one of the things I know about you is you're definitely focused on improving your management skills, and you've been doing that since almost, year one. And can you tell us some of the biggest things you've learned in dealing with obstacles within your company, whether it be feedback or anything else, and those biggest learning experiences that you've had as a manager, founder, and CEO?
Sure. There were so many. I probably on a consistent basis learning new things every day. I think because when you're starting out, right, you're so focused on growth. Like, how do I grow? How do I get customers? How do I grow? How do I get customers? Right? And then you're like, how do I make my service better? And then, so there's all this that, as I mentioned, it's important to define that one of your most important stakeholders are your employees. And building out good employee systems. And you guys, you see that every day, right? Like, you see that every day in the companies that scale too fast, Uber, that, are focused so much on growth, they forget about the importance of organizational culture. So I think developing those feedback systems, the close connections, if you can really, there's consultants and books and whatever have you, in terms of dialing in these elements of constantly measuring the temperature. Because I'll tell you what, and I work with these different hospital systems, the worst healthcare providers are the ones that burned out, and they're just burned out, and they're just sitting there fucking angry, and they're still rendering healthcare. It's like, like healthcare without empathy is like Disneyland without fun, right? It's legitimately like an oxymoron. So I think people that are burned out on healthcare, and it's easy to burn out on healthcare, need to figure out how to move on. And your job as a leader to figure out whose time is it to move on, how to re-engage them, how to put them in a different place. So I think there's a lot of that. The other biggest I think lesson I had was about risk. So when you're entering into and that's another oxymoron for when you're like a startup founder, right? Because you're like, your whole existence is about risk. Like, how am I going to make payments? How am I going to pay my salaries? What am I going to do? there's all this risk that's constantly evolved around you. And if you're risk averse, you're not going to start some shit, right? So if you're going to get into an industry like this, you're naturally going to have some numbness to some elements of risk. But that really screwed me along the way, because when you're not acute to different elements of risk, like employment law and all other kinds of elements, like I said, Medicare, Medi-Cal, everybody got a ton of rules. How do they do their job? How do you play by their rules? It's really that, like, how do you play by their rules? And there's so many rules that you gotta keep on top of, because fucking up one of them can really hurt you. Really, 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 kill you. So I think, like, learning what risk is all about was one of those moments for me. I think we had a serious issue, which we luckily recovered from, but many companies don't. So, like, figuring out what's your risk, like, what can screw you and kill you overnight, right? What can seriously stop your progress? And figuring those elements out, just like figuring your happy employee stuff, that's really important. The other stuff, I think you're gonna product market fit, marketing, sales, you'll get that stuff eventually, and if you don't, that's okay. You'll just grow slower. It's not all about growth, it's also about sustainable growth. And if you don't have sustainable elements supporting that growth, you're not gonna grow longer term.
So taking on that note, you guys are having sustainable growth at this point. What does the future look like for you in terms of planning for growth, executing on growth, and expanding to new territories as well?
It's a great question, and I'm like literally trying to answer it all the time. And that's kind of part of what I'm thinking. Okay, right? Part of it is value. What value do you bring to your customers? You constantly got to be like, what value do I bring to them? But it's also figuring it out. What do they need? When do they need it? How do you deliver it? How do you make it better? Where do you fit in the market space? Then you, of course, start also thinking about, like, profitability. How do I do it profitably? How do we scale profitably? I'll give you an example. Like, we've tried a service where we would visit patients post-discharge. So one of the big, I don't know how much people know about healthcare, but one of the big issues in healthcare right now is patients being readmitted to the hospital, because it's a huge cost, and you didn't treat the patient completely and they get back sick, they're back in the hospital, and they get the whole workup again. And so like half of healthcare talks about, like, how can we keep patients at home more often? So we're like, wait a minute, we're outside the walls of the hospital, maybe we can do this. And so we've launched this whole testing new products and trying shit out, and we launched a whole service where we would visit patients at home. But it was so low, such low margins, and so difficult to scale, that we agreed that that's probably not going to be the best long-term strategy. For us, long-term strategies right now is figuring out how to scale geographically. Scaling geographically very organically, super hard, because again, I go to Sacramento, I gotta build new network, I gotta build new relationships, I gotta buy all this, I gotta hire people. It's super hard, takes forever. So now I'm thinking, well, how do I accelerate that? One way of acceleration is partnerships, joint ventures. So I'm all about, like, figuring out how can I find the leaders in that market, and how can I help apply my operational knowledge and leverage and scale what we've learned here. I don't need the whole pie. I can share my pie with you, but if you can be the right partner for me. So that's my scalability strategy right now. So hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it sounds like you're going into a new territory, whatever that city may be, whatever that county may be, and it's not just like, hey, we're going to go and spend some money on Facebook ads, going to a landing page, and that's how we're going to land new customers, right? Or we're just going to build a little community, but it's like, hey, we got to establish partnerships, go through policies, we got to go through regulations, we got to talk to maybe like 5-10 different decision makers, and then not only just get them on board with your mission, but build that friendship, and knowing that that's going to be there for a very long time. And then, like as you said, maybe even firing the existing person that they're working with, so they can work with you. And maybe the existing person that they're working with, referencing what you said, is just burnt out. It just doesn't want to be there anymore.
Right. Who put it best for me is Marissa Mayers, who used to be the CEO of Yahoo, and I think she broke down burnout as an inability to do shit you like. I mean, really sacrificing things that are important. So figuring out like what's important to you. Like to me, I like to party. I like my family. I like having a social life. I like physical activity. So I think figuring out how to build your schedule, to build those things in, so then you're not depriving yourself. Because let's be real, if you're gonna go down this journey, you're gonna put a shit ton of time in, right? Like to me, I like to work in just big spurts. Like I'll work 3 weeks in a row. I'll skip some weekends, do that, right? But then I'll take a month off, right? Like this summer, and this is like when you're way late in the process, you hustled for 12 years. I took 2 months off with my kids. So we traveled around the world, and that was amazing because to me, that was one of those things that I really wanted to do. And you gotta be able to move your goals. I was hoping I'll get to do this way earlier, but here we are. It's all about those setbacks. And I think, I'll tell you one more thing. I think it's a lot about not being so hard on yourself and learning how to talk to yourself, right? You gotta learn how to talk to yourself, because a lot of us, when we get on this journey and you deal with all the shit that you just brought up. Oh, look at this guy, look at my competitor, look at where they are. I'm 12 years into this, they're $1 billion company, I'm making 20 million, like what the fuck, right? So you deal a lot with that, and so, and that helps, and then you just establish the little voice, like, oh, you're an idiot, you're failing, blah, blah, blah. And, I think we all start out with that, but learning how to make always be quiet or make it be positive, identifying trends that are not helping you build yourself, right? And letting them go is really, 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 really important. I think for me, like the breakthrough thing was working with a coach, because when I was having a lot of failures, it was really depressing. Right? And you can get veered off on all kinds of tangents there, but if you're like not a success in your own eyes, or you brought something up really important, you get into that cycle. And so again, like I had to hire a coach, and the coach for me is like, hey, here's my behavior. I don't want to have this behavior anymore. I don't want to hear that voice anymore. What do I need to do about it? So having a third party, whatever it is, right? Like a little circle that helps you out, or hiring a professional, even better. My coach lives in Oregon. I see him, once a year, but we talk. We're talking every week, once a week, one phone call, 1 hour. Here's what's going on, negative self-talk, let's get rid of it. So I think things like that help you be cool about where you are. I don't want to get all zen, but that's just key, because if you're happy where you are and you're not worried about competition, or you still want to be driven, I still want to be succeeding, I still want to kick ass, right? But I'm just cool if, I am where I'm at. It just was meant to be in my own development, with my own understanding, with my own skills, that's just it. Oh, that's cool.
Wow, I just want to thank you so much for being here tonight and taking time out of your busy schedule. And let's just give Steve a round of applause.